Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful, creepy little human being, you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's Morbid makeup video. I'm so happy we could meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow, in all of this craziness, today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or BRATTERSTEIN, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing a man named Jody Plauche. Jody Plauche is a man who became infamous for murdering his son's abductor and abuser on live television. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. One of us. One of us. And you can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter if you want. They're both BRATTERSTEIN, but no pressure. So guess what, guys? Today's video is sponsored by Dossier. Remember Dossier? Well, not only is Dossier sponsoring this video, but they're also letting me do a giveaway with my subscribers for the holiday season. How cool is that? Dossier is a fragrance company that creates luxury scents at a fraction of luxury prices, where generally an expensive perfume can be anywhere from $50 to hundreds of dollars. Dossier's cost anywhere from $29 to $49, and they offer bulk deals where if you buy 3 or more bottles, you get a percentage off, free shipping, all kinds of stuff. And it's a perfect deal for those of us who need to get some Christmas gifts, some holiday gifts, whatever you need presents for in your life in the coming months. Because I don't know about you, but I'm usually done shopping by now, but we're almost at Thanksgiving and I haven't even started. Well, that's a lie. I started a little bit, and actually it's going to sound like a lie, but it's not a lie. I did get a couple people something from Dossier, but don't tell anyone because it's a secret. So the 2 scents I got is Musky Rose, which is inspired by the Narciso Rodriguez for her perfume, which is the perfume that my husband's mother wears. And literally I smelled this and I was like, oh wow, that is your mom. And I made him smell it. He's like, oh wow, that is my mom. And I also got Citrus Green Apple, which is inspired by the Dolce & Gabbana perfume, Light Blue, which this actually smells so good. I haven't smelled Light Blue, but my sister loves that perfume and this smells so good. And what also is really, really great for me is that neither Narciso Rodriguez nor Dolce & Gabbana perfumes are cruelty-free, but Dossier perfumes are, and since I only buy cruelty-free beauty products, that's a big deal to me. Anyways, in addition to offering members of the Brat Pack 10% off their order with the code BRATTERSTEIN at checkout, they are also letting me do a giveaway for you guys. So all you have to do is comment down below with the name of the perfume by Dossier that you already wear and love, your all-time favorite, or a scent that you are very excited to try if you have not yet had the pleasure of trying Dossier. Make sure to include your email so that if you win, I can get a hold of you. You know, that would be helpful. And make sure to go to Dossier's website, which is dossier.co, and sign up for their newsletter, and also follow them on Instagram at dossier.perfumes. Don't worry, I will leave everything in the description box so you don't have to try to remember all the information I'm giving you right now, because I know that's a lot. But it'll all be listed down there for your convenience. You have until December 12th to enter the giveaway. After that date, I'm going to be choosing a winner, so make sure to keep an eye on your email, because if I don't hear back from you, I'm gonna have to move on to the next person. But that's really it. I just wanna say thank you to Dossier for sponsoring this channel again. We've been working together for several months now, and like, I feel like there's something here, you know what I mean? And of course, thank you to you guys for always being so stoked and supportive for all of my sponsors, which is pretty much Dossier, always. Because you guys are just so cool, and it's really cool to feel validated. So I'm happy that now I can give something back to you guys this holiday season. I can't snap, I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, now that I'm done spreading the good word of Dossier, we can get into this video. Now this is a video that's definitely gonna get your mind going. It's one that's not as divisive as you may have thought that it would be, especially at the time that it happened. At the time that it happened, everybody pretty much felt the exact same way. And I thought there'd be more controversy, and I feel like there might be more controversy now than there was then. Because I feel like vigilante justice is very controversial, particularly right now, if you catch my drift. So after Gary, the subject of today's story, learned what his son's abductor and abuser, a man named Jeff Duquette, had done to his boy, no one who lived in that area really blamed him for what he did or really thought that he should be held responsible. which was really, really intense. And the sentencing in this case is so crazy. It's unlike any other case that I think I've personally read about before. This is just a very unique case. It's one where once you hear all the details, I'm very curious to see what all of you guys think. I'm curious if this is going to be one of those cases where you find a murder just, or one where you relate more with the murderer than the murder victim. With that said, I'm going to tell you all about it so that you can hear all the details and make your own decision. And while I do, I'm going to be putting on a full face of makeup. So if that's not your thing, if you're kind of like, no, then, you know, it's cool. Thanks for hanging out this long. I hope you find a channel that tells you the story that you like better. But if you're kind of on the fence, like, I don't know how I feel about that, maybe stick around. I think you could be surprised by how much you like me. That's all. Just saying. With all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of Gary Plauche, the man who murdered his son's abuser on live television. Now, the why here, the why in this case, why was this man murdered, is very unique and very disturbing and very understandable in a way that is uncommon for cases we cover. We don't tend to be able to be like, I can understand why this person killed that person in a lot of the cases we covered, but I'm going to tell you all about it, and I think we should just start at the beginning so you can get the full picture of what happened here. Gary Plauche was born Leon Gary Plauche on November 10th, 1945 in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. There isn't a ton known about his early years, but I will tell you what we do know, and that is that he briefly served in the U.S. Air Force, where he earned the rank of Staff Sergeant, and after leaving the Army, Gary became an equipment salesman and also worked as a cameraman for a local news station. He ended up marrying a woman named June, and he had 4 children, 1 girl and 3 boys, and one of those children, his 11-year-old son named Jody, is one of the main people we will be discussing today. So our whole story today well, not our whole story, but the main big part of the story that got it into national news began on February 19th, 1984. And that's when Gary's 11-year-old son, Jody's karate instructor, picked him up to go for a ride. This karate instructor was a 25-year-old man named Jeff Duquette. He came over to the house, he picked Jody up, and he told Jody's mom, Gary's wife or ex-wife, it depends on what source you see, her name was June. He told June, I'll have your son back in 15 minutes, no problem. This wasn't weird. This is something that happened all the time. He would take the boys on a ride. He had even taught Jody how to drive a little bit. He's like, I'll bring him back in 15 minutes. But Jeff never did come back. And instead of going out for their quick errand, he bought 2 bus tickets and loaded him and the 11-year-old boy onto a bus to California. This was just completely horrifying and mind-boggling to both June and to Gary. Like, when Jeff didn't come back, they were blown away because it just didn't make any sense to them. So Jeff was the karate instructor, not just to Jody, but to 3 of the couple's 4 children. And he had never done anything that would be weird to them. He was considered to be a friend, not only to the boys, like he hung out with the boys, he would take them to movies, he would take them skating, he would give them driving lessons, but he was also friends with both of the boys' parents. He had like he had inserted himself into this family and their lives. They just spent a ton of time together, you know, him going off with the boys for things that they needed to do for their training. He would come over to the families for like family meals, not even just like in family, but they'd go to like extended family and they would bring him along. Jeff was just this kind of guy that was really nice, really friendly. He didn't have family in the area, so they kind of, you know, they felt bad that he didn't, so they would bring him in and bring him into their home and make them a part of their lives. And now he had just disappeared with their child. It was just crazy, and it came out of nowhere, and he had been alone with their son several times over the last year that he had been in their lives. So like, what was different about this time? Where were they? Why weren't they coming back? Jody Plauche, the boy who was kidnapped at this point, said of his coach Jeff in a school newspaper the previous year, the year before he was abducted, and I quote, "He's all of our best friend." So sad to be a kid and have your trust violated in the way that this kid's trust was violated. It pisses me off. But that's what happened. The man that Jody called his best friend had kidnapped him, gotten him on a bus, crossed several states and thousands of miles, and took him to Southern California. On the way there, Jeff, who had had a big beard, shaved it completely off, and he dyed Jody's naturally blonde hair black. He was hoping that when they got to California, he could pass Jody off as his son to avoid him getting caught for the kidnapping. Once in Southern California, Jeff checked him and Jody into a cheap motel that was just a hop, skip, and a jump away from Disneyland, because this hotel was in Anaheim, California, and he buttered the boy up, you know, made him feel better about being abducted by taking him to Disneyland. And it's so weird. There's so many interviews with Jody. If you ever want to go online, you can find a million. But he said that he doesn't even remember his childhood as bad. He's like, this bad thing happened to me, but I also got to go to California. I also got to go to Disneyland. It wasn't that bad of a childhood. I just had this one weird thing that happened to me, which to me, I was like, you are a bigger person than me here, because what happened to him was terrible. Once in the hotel, once they were alone in the hotel room, Jeff would sexually abuse Jody in a multitude of ways, which is just disgusting. And it's really sad, because what we learn later through interviews with Jody after Jeff is eventually caught is that the abuse didn't start on this trip. He had been sexually abusing this child for basically the entire year he had known him prior to the abduction. He had access to do this because Jeff was the boys' karate coach. This entailed, you know, overnight trips for practice or for tournaments, all kinds of different reasons where he would get the boy alone. I mean, he was also friends with the parents, so that wasn't really hard. And he would isolate Jody in whatever way he could, where he would then perform oral sex on him before raping him. And Jody later said that this started to happen every single day that they were together, which was most days, period. And sometimes this would happen more than once a day. Jody said that this all started one day when Jeff was teaching one of the classes, and he asked the group of young boys who would like to learn how to drive. All these little boys. And Jody raised his hand. And he said the next thing he knew, he was in the car and he was sitting in Jeff's lap, and Jeff had his hand in Jody's lap. From there, Jeff would just try to isolate Jody however he could. At some points, he would end up having the whole karate class, all the kids. He'd tell them to go to 7-Eleven to go pick up some snacks. But he'd be like, not you, Jody. You stay around. I need you to stay because I have some extra work for you to do. And that's when he would shepherd him into the back room. Jody said of this abuse and the process of grooming him, essentially, not essentially, it's exactly what he did. And I quote, "It was over several months before he ever started to do anything, and he had already been testing the boundaries. He had begun the grooming process, not just on me, but my family. Pedophiles are very good at what they do. One of the things they'll do with the grooming is to test the child's boundaries. Jeff would go, 'We need to stretch,' so he'd be touching around my legs. That way, if he grabbed my private area, he could say, 'Oh, it was an accident. We were just trying to stretch.' Or if we were driving a car, he'd put his hand in my lap and might go, 'Oh, I didn't mean to. I didn't realize my hands were there.' That's the slow and gradual seduction." Over the several days that Jeff had Jody locked up in that hotel room with him, he did actually strangely allow Jody to call his parents and to let them know that he was okay and that everything was going fine and that he was having a good time. But Jeff was just careful to make sure that Jody didn't give any information away about what they were really doing or where they actually were. But even though he was as careful as he could be, this did end up being his downfall, because during one of these phone calls, the police were there and they were able to quickly track his location, and that's where they found that he was in a motel room in Anaheim, California. So as you can imagine, police raided the F out of that hotel room. They broke in and they arrested Jeff, and I guess Jeff went easily. He didn't put up a fight at all. He was just like, "You got me." And little Jody was taken to a hospital where he was checked to make sure he was okay. He was also given a rape test, and it was found that there was Jeff's DNA inside Jody's body, as I'm sure you could have already imagined. And I can't even fathom being his parents and learning this information, because the officer did tell June and Gary what had happened to their son. And then what happened next is what happened next, you know? And a lot happened next, you know? According to Sheriff Mike Barnett, which is the officer who actually informed June and Gary of what Jeff had done to their son, He said that Gary had the exact reaction that most parents do when they find out that their child has either been molested or raped, and that is that he was horrified. On March 1st, 1984, Jody was reunited with his parents in Louisiana. And now if you remember, he was abducted on February 19th. Can you imagine? I know a lot of you are parents because I've seen your comments. Can you imagine not knowing where your child was for that many days? It literally makes me like I can't even, I don't know what you would do. I don't know how you would deal with that. But he was returned to his family on that day, and I watched the reunion. There's so many videos online of this, and I watched the reunion, and they are so like, especially his mom is so calm and just touching his hair and like looking at his face and just so happy that he's home. And I just don't even know what I would do, especially knowing what happened to him. It's just like, it makes me so uncomfortable. So after his arrest in California, Jeff was put on a plane with police to fly back to Louisiana to face the consequences of what he had done. And police officers were very careful in trying to make sure that Gary and Gary's wife were not aware of when his flight was coming in, what flight it was going to be, what day, what time, nothing. They wanted to keep it very hush-hush, probably to avoid exactly what did end up happening here. But Gary was just straight up not dealing well with what happened to his son. He was feeling, I can't even imagine how he was feeling, but just rage. He was very, very angry, and he started spending all of his days and all of his evenings at a bar called the Cotton Club getting hammered. And as I'm sure you can imagine, well, not imagine, as it is often seen, alcohol and rage are not the best mix. But that didn't stop Gary from going. He would go and he would hang around. This was like a smaller area, so he knew a lot of the people there. And when he would get there, he'd get his little drink on, he would just start talking to people and be like, so when do you think Jeff's flight's gonna come in? Like, what day, what time? Have you heard anything? Because I'd like to have a conversation with the man, if you know what I mean. Well, on one of these nights in March, Gary's there asking these questions. He runs into a friend of his, a friend who works for WBRZ News, where Gary used to work as a cameraman. Because remember I said that was one of the jobs he had. He runs into this friend, and he asks this guy the same question he'd been asking everybody else, like, have you heard anything? Do you have any idea when Jeff might be coming in? Because I'd like to talk to the man. And that's when his friend told him, yes, actually I do know that. He's coming in tonight. His flight comes in tonight, March 16th, 1984 at 9:08 p.m. And this just brings my brain right back to a very chilling statement that at the time just probably felt like a normal response from a father learning that his son had been raped by a friend of his. And that was him telling that officer, Mike Barnett, I'll kill that son of a bitch. So anyways, Gary gets that information at the bar, and I haven't seen exactly what he said, but what I picture in my head is him just being like, oh, cool, cool, cool. On an unrelated note, I gotta go, and just go. And then he throws a shot back and just leaves. And that's when he goes home and he gets his gun, which is a .38 snub nose revolver, and Gary heads to the airport. Gary wore a baseball hat and these big sunglasses to the airport, I imagine to hide his appearance, though I didn't see that anywhere. Just when I saw photos of him and video of him from that day, it looks like he was trying to hide who he was to me. And then he walked over to a row of payphones and he picked one of the phones up and he made a call to, I believe, his best friend named Jimmy. All of a sudden, Gary said into the phone to his friend, "Here he comes. You're about to hear a shot." So what had happened is, as Gary was standing there at the row of payphones, he looks up at about 9:30 p.m. and he sees Jeff being led through the airport by a bunch of cops. And following the cops was a news crew, the WBRZ news crew, the one where his friend, the source who gave him the information on when Jeff's flight was coming in, that news crew was there and had been filming the whole thing, following the caravan of cops, because this story, this abduction case, was news in that area. So they were filming the entire thing. As Jeff and the officers walk by the row of payphones, Gary sees him, sees that it's him, bends down and pulls the gun from his boot, and then points the gun right at Jeff's head, right next to his ear, and pulls the trigger, firing one hollow point bullet into Jeff Duquette's head. Everything happened so fast, dude. Like, just like that, just boom, 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 and it's all caught on camera. And I actually did see the video of this happening because it was filmed. It's a little bit challenging to find, but you can find it because it was broadcast on live television. You see it in the video. It all happens so fast, and immediately the cops knew that it was Gary. They might not have recognized him when they saw it, but as soon as it happened, they knew that the person who did this was Gary Plauche. Plauché. The famous quote on this case was, "Why, Gary, why?" And that's what the officer screamed. I think it was Mike Barnett, actually, as he ran to Gary and disarmed him. And Gary answered through tears that if someone did it to your kid, you do it too. After being shot, Jeff he just falls to the ground. He rolls over a little bit, and that's kind of it. In the video, you can see his face, which is really weird, and there's nothing there anymore. There's nothing behind his eyes, and he's just kind of like, that was it. And an officer goes over and kneels beside him and kind of touches him, and it's just like, God damn it. And the next day, Jeff went into a coma and ended up dying. June, Jody's mother, learned about Jeff's murder on the news, and essentially on the news it just said that an unidentified man had murdered Jeff Duquette, and immediately she knew that it was Gary. I guess she ended up going and visiting him in jail even, and she told him, like, you're gonna go to hell for this, because I guess they were religious. I didn't see a lot of reports about them being religious when I was looking it up. I just saw this one report about her saying that to him, and him saying that, like, he knew, but it was worth it. So Gary was arrested, obviously, and once he was arrested, he told his defense attorney that he heard the voice of God, actually God himself telling him to pull the trigger, and that he just could not bear the thought of this man hurting another kid, which I do think kind of contradicts the God thing personally. But his attorney did think that Gary was going to get off and he wasn't going to serve any time because of the fact that it was so clear that Jody was groomed by Jeff. You could just see it. Once you knew, you could just see it all laid out of exactly what happened, and that he believed that the realization of the rape, the year of rapes against his son, 11-year-old boy, learning that had happened had made him go into a psychotic state. He'd had a break from reality, and that he didn't know right from wrong when he committed the murder. I personally disagree with that. I don't think that Gary didn't know right from wrong. I think Gary knew. I don't think Gary gave a shit. And most of the people who lived in that area who knew of the crime thought the same thing. They thought he knew, they thought he didn't care, and they also didn't think that Gary had done anything wrong. A journalist who worked for the Washington Post at the time wrote of the public's opinion towards Gary and his crime, and I quote, "From the strangers in the streets to the boys at the Cotton Club where Gary Plauche used to drink Miller Lights, the locals had already acquitted him. He's a father who done it out of the love for his child and his pride," said a man named Murray Curry. He was a local man who was a riverboat captain. And when I read that, I was like, how cool is that? That that's somebody's actual job? Maybe I'm just so LA and basic, but the fact that that's actually somebody's job is amazing to me. And his name's Murray Curry, which is adorable. Anyway. Murray Curry, along with many other locals in the area, actually donated money to Gary's cause so that he could get out on bail. I think he had a $100,000 bail, and people donated money to help him get out of jail and to help him keep his head and his family's heads above water while he went through his trial. People were really, really behind him. And I understand, and I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of people who agree. I can see why a lot of people were like, man, if that was my kid, I would have done the exact same thing. Because you have this innate, to protect your kids, you know? I think you know. The intensity of which the public supported Gary was undeniable and unavoidable, really. And it actually ended up causing the judge to make it so that Gary did not serve any prison time. He said in doing so, it would have been counterproductive. The judge felt certain that Gary was not a danger to anyone, that he only intended to hurt one person, and that was Jeff Duquette, and this person was already dead, so he wasn't a danger to society, so why give him jail time? Gary was initially charged with second-degree murder, but agreed to a plea bargain in which he pled no contest to manslaughter. In doing so, instead of getting time, Gary was given a 7-year suspended sentence with 5 years of probation and 300 hours of community service. And his life, essentially, just immediately went back to normal. Gary ended up dying in 2014 at the age of 68 from complications from a stroke, and his obituary said of him, and I quote, "Gary saw beauty in everything. He was a loyal friend to all. He always made others laugh and was a hero to many." But one fun fact is before his death, he did actually end up giving an interview, and in the interview he said that if he could, he would go back and he would kill Jeff again, so there was no remorse there. I don't know if there should be. I'd love to know what you think, but yeah, he was just like, I'd do that all over again, so. Jody said of his father after his death, and I quote, "A lot of people remember a guy who shot somebody. I remember someone who would pick up stray animals. Someone who was a kind soul. A gentle person." As for Jody and what happened to him, he needed time to process what happened, to come to terms with the assault, and to actually not resent his father. Because though he was kidnapped and he was abused and he was raped and all of this happened for over a year, and though he did not like what Jeff was doing to him, he didn't. He said that he didn't like it, but that he liked everything else about Jeff. Jeff was his best friend. Everything else they did together was fun. All the affection and attention he gave him, he wanted. So though he didn't like this one part of what Jeff did, he liked Jeff. So when his father killed Jeff, he was actually upset with his dad for it, which is really complicated, but like, he was 11 years old. He didn't understand, you know what I mean? That's a really complicated age in general. That's a really complicated thing to go through as a kid that age, and to process and compartmentalize and really understand what had happened to him and what Jeff was, which wasn't his friend. It was his groomer and abuser. It was just a really complicated situation for him, is my entire point. And he actually ended up writing a book about this, about his experience and what happened. And the book is titled Why, Gary, Why? After the first sentence that the cop said to Gary after Gary murdered Jeff. And this book is dedicated to both Mike Barnett, the sheriff who, found Jody, took him in, the one that was friends with Gary, and told Gary what happened and everything. And also he dedicated it to his mother, June, because he said that his mother was a very calm woman, that though he knew that she was just as upset as her father was, or as his father was, that her energy and keeping calm and just being very open with him made it easy for him to communicate and be open about what happened to him, which in turn helped him heal. Just having somebody there to listen to him and believe him and be open with him and not intense and aggressive and angry made it easier for him to open up and talk and heal. In this book, Jody sort of tells the story from his point of view, what he saw, what he experienced, what the grooming process was like, and helps give parents tips to help prevent things like this from happening to their children in the future. Jody said of all of this, and I quote, "I think one of the things people really don't understand is why I didn't tell then. 1, I was 10. And 2, what was happening, I knew would upset my parents. 3, at the time, I didn't want him to get in trouble. It was easier for me to keep quiet and shut up than to upset everyone." Jody also discusses little signs that you could look for as a parent to see that something might be up with your kid that you might not even realize are signs at the time. Like in Jody's case, for example, he had played several sports alongside karate, but he ended up telling his parents that he wanted to quit all those other sports so he could dedicate all of his time to only karate. And he ended up coming out and saying that Jeff had essentially told him he had to do this because he wanted to have as much time with him as possible. And in addition to that, during this time, Jody had gotten very separate from his father, Gary. And that's because Jeff would make Jody feel bad about spending time with his father if he would be alone with him or do something with his dad that was a bonding moment for them. Jeff would get upset and be like, well, you're only supposed to love me. I'm supposed to be the most important person to you. So that made Jody get distant from his own father. Jody also tells parents to be especially careful. And I talked to my husband about this one too, now that we're about to have a child of our own, that you have to be very careful what you say to children, especially when it comes to the topic of abuse. Saying things like, oh, I will kill someone if they're ever inappropriate with you. Anything along that line is counterproductive, because when it comes to pedophiles abusing children, they don't do it by force and intimidation and anger and like physical violence generally. They do it the opposite way. They win the kid's affection. They bring them in. They make the child love them. They make the child have this weird dynamic where they feel like this person is their friend. They win them over with affection and attention and love and gifts and friendship and wonder, and it's just this one thing amongst a million good things that's happening. So when the parent tells the kid, like, I will kill this person if they ever hurt you, the kid believes that and doesn't want this person to get in trouble because this is their friend. This is somebody they care about. So when the abuse starts, they don't want to tell their parents because they don't want this person to get in trouble because they care about this person. Jody said his father did exactly what he's telling parents here not to do. He said of his father, and I quote, "My dad was absolutely too extreme. If anyone ever touches my kid, I'll kill him. And I knew he wasn't kidding. That's why I couldn't tell him, and that's exactly what he ended up doing." Jody also says of him and his future and children, and I quote, "I don't want kids. Do I not want them because of what happened? Probably." As an adult, Jody obtained his bachelor's degree in general studies from Louisiana State University with minors in psychology, speech communications, and philosophy. He has worked in the field of violence prevention since 1995. He served on the executive board for Men Against Violence at his college. He worked at Victim Services Center of Montgomery County, a comprehensive crime victim center in Pennsylvania, and at Victim Services, Jody worked as a sexual assault counselor as well as a prevention educator, and eventually became the supervisor of community education programs. Last I saw, Jody was presenting professional and college trainings about sexual violence risk reduction throughout the country. So he really is doing the best with the cards that he was dealt. He really, like, life gave him lemons, and he really did just say, like, fuck lemons and bail. Not really, but you know what I mean. So, should Jody Plauche have served time? Was his murder justified? Do you think he actually heard voices? Do you think he had a psychotic break? Or was he just a pissed off father who decided to play judge, jury, and executioner? These are my questions to you. This is a really interesting case. I find the entire thing to be fascinating, and I'm really curious about what you think. So I feel like emotionally, we want to be like, fuck Jeff. Jeff was a piece of shit, child molesting asshole. But when it comes to vigilante justice, it's like, okay, if you're fine with it here, where's the line? That's a question that I think is important, because the line's different for a lot of people morally, and we need to know where that line is. And I'm just curious as to what you think about the whole thing. Like, I can understand feeling sympathetic and being like, yeah, what he did was justified, but should he have been able to do it? Should he have had to serve time? Just let me know what you think down below, because I feel like there's going to be a lot of opinions here. But anyways, guys, that completes this video. I hope you found it interesting and informative, and it gave you every bit of information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, I want to thank you for remembering Jody with me today. What happened to him is so sad. Sexual abuse of children is so fucking gross, and just like, I do not get it. I'll never be able to get it. And then it's so complicated for the kids to have this happen to them and have all of these conflicting feelings about how they should feel, and like still caring about their abuser and not wanting them to get in trouble, and how complicated that must have been for him to go through. I will never be able to understand, and it's so fucked up that any kid should ever have to go through something like that. These monsters really do just insert themselves into people's lives and burrow into these people's hearts and emotions just to hurt children, and that is a lot to think about. It freaks me out and it breaks my heart, and like, we just truly, it's everywhere. So you have to stay vigilant. Maybe not vigilante, but vigilant, you know? Anyways, please let me know down below of any cases you would like to see me cover in the future. As you know, I have a long list of cases, and anytime you leave a suggestion, I put your name down. next to the suggestions so I can give you a shout out because I know you're filled with good ideas and good taste. Otherwise you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell because I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically, you. And if you're ever curious about the makeup I use, the nail polish, earrings, anything that's going on from here up, plus these little digits, make sure to check down in my description box because I have all of this linked along with all of my social media if you want to hang out more consistently. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook page, and Facebook group, and also a link to my merch if that's something that you're interested in, because some of you are, and that's why I made it. So I want to say one more thank you to Dossier for liking the content and sponsoring this video. I think it's really tight. I love working with Dossier, as you guys know, and of course don't forget to enter the giveaway so you can hopefully win a brand new bottle of perfume. I wish you could all win, but I am not made of money and it doesn't grow on these trees, but I am happy to be able to give something to one of you because you guys have given me so much happiness and satisfaction and you guys are dope as hell. And with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here. You could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.